the Running Chills podcast. Tonight's tale is The Train to Nowhere. But first, a word from our spirited sponsors.
The Running Chills podcast is supported with generous donations from undead like you and by Suds and Spooks Laundry. We'll have your sheets back to you by sundown. We can remove bloodstains, dirt and mud, pesky webs and spiders, frightened yourself stains, and so much more. Remember, you might be dead, but that doesn't mean that you need to look like it. Give your laundry to Suds and Spooks. Enjoy our tales? These stories are available via Kindle, paperback, and even a hardcover edition. You can find all of them in Rip Graven's book, Running Chills, wherever books are sold to mortals. Interested in supporting our podcast? Visit talesbyripgraven.com to join our Patreon and receive exclusive merch, such as the Running Chills t-shirt, as well as access to a full digital issue of Haunters Monthly. You can even sign up for us to send a raven your way each time something new is unearthed in the Running Chills universe. And now, I'll turn it back to our hauntingly good host.
I'm not sure how good I actually am. And now, the train to nowhere. To learn to live.
There are many interesting and peculiar tales passed down from the western frontiers of America, but few rival that of the legend of Angus Bloodoath Holland and his Shadow Horsemen. The exact locations, towns, and people involved have become so varied in retellings that it's difficult to pinpoint the specific details and authenticate the stories. The legend has earned an air of mystery and garnered those who cast a critical eye toward the believability of the accounts, whilst also gaining enthusiastic followers who swear by the truth of the tale. Historians have altogether avoided the topic, choosing instead to focus on more approachable and verifiable stories from America's rather rambunctious past. What follows is a retelling of events, chronicling the rise of Angus Holland's Shadow Horsemen throughout America's western frontier. Death was but moments away. Famine, disease, and conflict were abundant. In the American West, the law was what one made of it, a bullet often the decider of ownership rights to land and wealth. If toiling under the societal underpinnings of your family name was not to your tastes or sensitivities, there was but one other profession to consider: the outlaw. Jack Weatherby suffered no fools. Although his father had been a wealthy real estate baron of sorts, Jack was not taken to wearing pressed clothes and socializing with the Yankee elites as his father did. He longed for adventure and a fight, and upon his father's death, Jack sold all his family's investments. He had no interest in wealth other than using it to fuel his desired lifestyle, that of an outlaw. Money could buy anything. It could even buy your way out of the noose or prevent lawmen from pursuing you. Jack had plenty of it, setting his sights on robbing a few small-town banks just for the thrill of the action. During his second robbery, Jack shot and killed a sheriff in the main street, right out in public view. To his shock, the town allowed Jack to take whatever he wanted without a fight. That's when Jack realized there would be no consequences for his actions, assuming his trigger finger was fast enough. A few towns later, Jack met a dismal collection of men down on their luck, without food or work, drinking away the last of their wages. Jack threw down a satchel of gold before them and offered to handsomely reward each for their allegiance. The men took to joining Jack gleefully, as their lot had never experienced the comfort wealth could bring. Now women, lodging, fine horses, saddles, firearms, and enough food to never hunger again were at their disposal due to following Jack, including copious amounts of drink. When asked where this wealth came from, Jack always pointed to the robberies he had committed, even though this was patently false. Jack was convincing enough. The men assumed such wealth from robberies would be theirs if they joined him in his outlaw lifestyle. Jack trained his men in the desert to be the fastest six-shooters around, with enough accuracy to claim they could knock the barbed spines off a cactus. The group traveled the frontier from town to town, murdering anyone who stood in their way, and rewarding those who assisted them. Papers in the area began calling their group the Golden Nine, as they always robbed from those who could spare a fortune, lavishing that wealth upon the town they were staying in. This took the form of paying townsmen for keeping guard and being lookouts while they drank, or leaving large tips to barkeeps and ladies of the evening. One account claimed the Golden Nine donated an absurd amount to a local hotel needing updates to its weathered facade, just as a thanks for a good night's rest. Some residents cheered the bandits' arrival, knowing prosperity would flow into town, even if it was at the expense of their local banker. Unfortunately, the outlaw lifestyle had its own share of drawbacks. Each man from the Golden Nine had warrants out for their arrest. Lawmen from far and wide attempted to apprehend the group, and it was during a rather intense ambush that one of the Golden Nine fell during an exchange of bullets. When Jack and his men regrouped to consider their next move, a sober awareness arose that they were now one man short. Seeking to remedy this, Jack and his bandits eventually recruited a young boy from the next town to train up. Angus was an orphan who had been taken in by a local parish in an act of grace. The town minister had fed and clothed the boy, teaching him to read from the scriptures as well as maintain the church property. When the Golden Nine, now 8, pulled into a small town, young Angus happened to cross paths with Jack. The rest, as they say, is history. Jack made a sizable contribution to the parish and offered the boy a chance to see the Wild West. Angus took Jack up on the offer. The young boy's fate was now set in motion.
The name Angus translated means one choice. Indeed, this one choice to join Jack and his men in the Golden Nine changed Angus's fortunes forever, setting him on a path to eventually lead the notorious posse known as the Shadow Horseman. The young boy would eventually become known as Angus Bloodoath Holland.
As the years flew by, Angus grew into an irreplaceable member of the Golden Nine. Jack treated Angus as a prodigy of sorts, giving him the best training in firearms, riding, and the strategic philosophies of excelling as an outlaw. The men in the group had aged and become less capable, while Angus was young and agile comparatively, a strapping young man now in his early 20s, with all Jack's training and expertise to boot. The Golden Nine wasn't looking so golden in these late days. Their opportunities were getting fewer, the cuts were getting smaller. Local lawmen were increasing in numbers, while towns that previously cheered for their arrival became supportive of law and order, rather than aiding outlaws for coin. The Golden Nine kept to themselves more now, living in a set of caverns they had discovered in the desert. Other than supply runs and the occasional robbery, the bandits lived on their own terms, just outside of the law's reach. The Golden Nine were restless and frustrated with the lack of action as of late. Lying low began taking a toll on the outlaws. Some men entertained the idea of breaking away and becoming more aggressive with their tactics, while others began considering taking their share of the wealth, settling down somewhere far away. Jack had admitted as much to Angus in private. Angus, being the most capable of the group besides Jack himself, was often sent to scout out new opportunities for plunder. Truth be told, Angus volunteered to do so, rather than sit around listening to the men quibble on about the old days with Jack. During one of these scouting missions, Angus took note of a rail company that had set up an office of sorts near the main line. The outer wall of the office was painted with verbiage advertising the ability to transport and protect a variety of goods. Clearly, this service opened new opportunities for business along the rail lines, but for Angus, this presented something new to exploit on behalf of the Golden Nine. Angus visited the rail company later that week under the guise of businessmen looking to transport valuable goods. He figured that if anything of high value were to be moved by train, this method of inquiry would make him privy to the details of when and where such goods would be. As it turned out, a guarded shipment full of large crates, filled with precious valuables, was to be on the rails near Red Run Canyon next week. Angus thanked the rail company for this information, excusing himself to discuss the shipping price with his business partners. All too easy. Angus had learned well from Jack. Valuable information only costs the promise of profit to those who hold such. Jack was pleased with how easily Angus gained visibility into the movement of expensive goods along the rail line. The men grew in excitement as well, as this was an opportunity to get some action, not to mention considerable profit. The Golden Nine previously robbed banks and stagecoaches, but a moving train, a heist of such caliber, would put this collection of outlaws back on the map. They might even make the front page of the local papers once again. Their plan was straightforward enough. 2 of the men would hide behind rock formations with wagons at the ready to load the large valuable crates. 1 man would place dynamite on the trestle bridge extending over the canyon and light the fuse. The other 6 men would ride up as the train rounded Crow's Overlook, a rather tight turn for the rail line, as it headed toward Red Run Canyon. This approach would give minimal visibility to those in the train before the Golden Nine set upon them, as well as force the train to slow enough during the turn for the men to board from horseback. In a perfect scenario, they would board the train, disconnect the rear boxcars, allow the locomotive to cross over the trestles, then detonate the bridge before anyone was the wiser. With an engine that has no way back across the canyon, the outlaws would have plenty of time to kill those guarding the goods and load anything of value into their wagons before the train was reported missing. Timing had an enormous impact on the 6 bound to board the train.
We'll need to be close enough to the bridge to disconnect the rail cars, and allow the locomotive to cross without taking note of the load change,
Jack advised, pointing to a rough sketch Angus had made of the crossing. At this, the men became critical of the plan. There were many ways in which things could go wrong. One voice of dissent could be heard above the discussion.
Once that bridge is blown, if we engage those brakes too late, we'll find ourselves along for a steep drop in the canyon below. I'm not looking to meet my maker so soon. Pardon the disrespect, but this plan could go to shit at the rattle of a snake.
The majority of the men looked on, somber at this bleak prospect. Jack exchanged a glance with Angus, then finally spoke.
You have a valid point. While we need that locomotive to cross the bridge without enough time to understand what we have done, it's to our benefit to engage the brakes early enough to prevent finding ourselves a party to the explosive finale.
The men quieted, eager to hear what Jack was to propose.
Based on my calculations, we'll need the boxcars disconnected within about 60 seconds of boarding the train at Crow's Overlook.
A chorus of objections arose. Another voice among the men could be heard.
The hell? 60 seconds? How are we supposed to cross an entire train from the caboose in under a minute? Now, we've been doing this a long time, but Jack, you may have finally had too much of Jasper's hooch.
Angus grinned.
All right, men. Let Jack finish. We wouldn't be bringing this to you if there wasn't serious coin involved.
Jack pulled his revolver from his holster and fired it into the glass jar full of moonshine. The precious liquid spilled out onto the hideout's dirt floor. The men gasped.
Clearly Jasper's bottle of hooch was full, and shame as it was to lose it, I believe my point has been made. Now, do I need to empty any other liquor supplies to prove my sobriety, or are we good to move forward with the rest of the plan?
Jack asked, waving his pistol. This shut the men up. Jasper was angered a bit, shaking his head at the loss.
What did the hooch ever do to you?
Jack ignored the comment, continuing his explanation.
We will not be boarding the train from the rear. We will need to board from about 2 cars behind the engine.
Silence fell upon the men as they pondered this new information.
2 cars behind the engine at Crow's Overlook. 60 seconds and then a decouple. We'll engage the brakes immediately, and the rest should work itself out.
Hopes began to rise as the men found this plan to be of merit. Jasper raised his hand.
Now I have a question. Who was the unlucky son of a bitch tasked with the dynamite?
The men looked on at Jasper, and no one dared volunteer. Jack glanced around the room, and then smiled at Jasper.
Looks like we have our volunteer.
The big day finally came, and just as predicted, the train came thundering down the rails toward Red Run Canyon. The Golden Nine were ready. 2 men remained with the wagon stashed out of sight, while Jasper had the unfortunate assignment of handling the dynamite, lashing all the sticks to the bridge trestles and lighting the fuse. Angus felt a heaviness in his chest as the pressure from the moment began setting in. The Golden Nine lying in wait as their plunder drew near. The sound of the approaching train filled their ears as canyon walls thundered with what they could hear, but not yet see. Jack turned to Angus and gave him a wink, kicking his horse with the spur of his boot. The 6 rode hard. They only had this one shot at getting on board the speeding train. As the train rounded Crow's Overlook, Jack was the first to make the jump on board, then Angus, followed by 2 more of their men. 2 riders in the rear missed their jumps, and as the train continued on, the distance became too great for them to catch up. Jack and Angus made quick work of decoupling the engine around the second car. The locomotive pushed onward, unaware that a change in its load had occurred. Jack and his men managed to engage the lead car's brake, and thus the rear portion of the train boxcars began a drawn-out, extremely loud process of slowing. As the cars ground to a halt and the locomotive continued to cross the trestles that would soon be blown, the 4 bandits on board the train boxcars now faced their truest test, eliminating any guards. Jack gave Angus an order.
Climb topside and cross the train. When you get to the final car, help the 2 who missed their jump get on board. Work together and clear the final cars of any guards. I'll meet you in the middle of the train and we'll secure the valuable cargo together.
Angus quickly swung himself atop the rail car and dashed across the tops as he approached the rear. Angus had made it more than halfway when an unexpected sight arose from a gap between the boxcars. A lone minister with a white collar and a pistol strapped to his side now stood in his path, holding up a wooden cross as if to repel him. The fuse failed. Panic beset Jasper, the lone man from the Golden Nine assigned to blow the bridge. A grim reality began to set in. The locomotive noted its missing cargo, and it slowed on the other side of the canyon, clearly intent on coming back to claim the missing railcars. It was up to him to prevent this, and due to the failed fuse, Jasper had a choice to make: abandon his post or give up his life by lighting the fuses at an inescapable proximity to the eventual explosion. The choice was obvious.
Jack opened and cleared the first few train cars with ease. For what was supposed to be a train filled with precious valuables, the contents seemed lackluster. The train included various food items and goods, none of which were worth the trouble of transporting, much less robbing a train for. It wasn't until the 4th or 5th car that Jack realized what trouble they were in.
The bridge didn't blow. That engine's headed right back here.
One of the men shouted frantically after glancing out the side of the now stopped railcars. Jasper had failed them. Jack shifted his strategy to accommodate. Clearing the remaining cars was going to have to wait. They had larger problems.
Ordering his men to retreat, they sprinted back to the first car in order to board and capture the locomotive upon its attempt to reconnect.
Repent, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do.
The minister yelled as he held up a wooden cross toward Angus at a distance atop the railcar. A momentary pause hung in the air. Then the priest made a move for his holstered gun. Sweat stung Angus's eyes as he drew first. This moment felt as if in slow motion. Memories of a kind parish minister taking him in filled his mind as he faced this similarly clothed foe. Angus knew his bullet would hit its mark before the priest could draw on him. He also sincerely regretted that he had to pull the trigger on a holy man. The minister dropped easily enough.
Angus approached, taking the scene in. Sure enough, the 2 men who had missed their jump rode up on the final railcar and began boarding. Beneath him lay the minister, a bullet hole through his temple, as well as the cross he had been holding up. What belief led you on such a fool's errand? Given your life, all to protect the wealth of others?
His question was interrupted by the metal railcar roof beneath him, shuddering as the locomotive attempted to recouple the train cars, dramatically shifting them after impact one by one in a ripple effect, throwing Angus on his backside atop the current car. Jack and his men waited until the locomotive secured a connection once again to the rear cars. Just as the engineer double-checked the connections and chains, Jack kicked his car door open and fired multiple shots into the engineer's chest. The three men moved with significant speed, clearing the two cars ahead of them as well as the engine with ease. At this point, it was better to protect the locomotive, so Jack assigned the men accompanying him to hold it and repel any attacks if they came. Just as this was happening, Jasper rode up and joined Jack. Jack gave Jasper a stern look.
You and I will have some words later.
Jasper nodded in an apologetic fashion.
For now, make it up to the men by clearing these cars and aiding us in securing the goods.
With that, Jack tipped his hat to the two assigned to defend the engine and motioned with his pistol to Jasper and toward the rear cars. Angus got back on his feet. He could hear the shots being fired from the rear car. Deploying the element of surprise, Angus dropped in the opening between the boxcar nearest him, silently making his way through the remaining interior cars so as to flank the guards firing upon his men. There were 4 priests with a mix of long and short guns taking up position behind a few of the large crates. By the time the ministers realized Angus was behind them, it was too late. Angus quickly dispatched the lot of them. The mission wasn't without its first loss. The holy men had shot and killed one of the 2 members of the Golden Nine who had boarded from the rear. The other was wounded in the shoulder, but otherwise fine. Angus and his wounded man searched the remaining cars until they encountered Jack and Jasper. Unexpectedly, there were no additional guards on board the train throughout their search of the rail cars. This was enough for Jack to recall his men from protecting the locomotive while signaling the wagons to pull alongside the stopped train. It was time to load the valuables they came for. After searching the train, the only large crates sealed with valuables seemed to come from the rear section of boxcars where the priests had been keeping watch. The Golden Nine, now 8, failed to understand why these crates warranted ministers with long guns and not the typical lawmen guarding their contents.
Whatever the cargo, clearly it has value,
Angus surmised out loud.
Worst case, we have stumbled upon priceless relics or something of the sort,
Jack remarked.
We'll sell whatever we find and take the proceeds that way if need be.
The men were downcast about this prospect, while also upset over losing one of their own. But none had time to dwell on these things or to inspect the crates before loading them up. With the sun setting in a few hours, they needed to be gone before anyone else came along. All agreed that the best way to hide their sloppy handiwork would be to rewire the dynamite fuses, blow the bridge, and then run the train into the canyon. Jack and the men rode back with the wagons, leaving Jasper and Angus behind. Jasper detonated the bridge as Angus supervised, making sure the job was finished this time. Once the bridge was finally blown, they got the train up to speed and then ditched it. As Angus and Jasper watched the train disappear into the canyon gorge below, the 2 men said a prayer for their fallen brother, whose remains would be forever entombed in the wreckage below. The sun set as the 2 rode back without speaking. It was nightfall before they arrived back at their hideout in the caverns of the desert. None of their group's usual laughter or quarreling could be heard, other than the flickering flames of the interior cavern campfires. Not a sound emanated from the familiar walls of stone. This didn't sit right with Angus, who knew something must be afoot.
Did they take the loot and run out on us?
Jasper whispered, anger weighing on his brow. Angus put a finger to his lips and motioned to his revolver. The 2 drew slowly as they approached the inside of their home in silence. What they found next could only be described as a bloodbath. Once inside the caverns, Angus and Jasper found a blood-soaked floor. All of their men dead and bloodied, Jack included. Multiple crates were opened, revealing the contents that the priests had guarded on the train. gold, art, various treasures from European nations, as well as multiple black coffins. The coffins were open and empty.
What the hell happened here?
Angus whispered in disbelief.
We need to leave now.
Angus had no sooner muttered these words aloud when a shadow dropped from the cave ceiling upon Jasper and feasted upon his flesh. Screams for help from Jasper ensued as Angus unloaded his entire revolver into the figure. Realizing his ammunition had no effect, Angus sprinted toward the cave exit. What seemed like a gust of air hit him in the chest. The being, whatever devil it was, dragged him backward as it flew through the air. Despite the creature's might, Angus broke its grip and once again advanced toward an escape. This time, multiple shadows stood at the cave exit, blocking his path. The truth was sobering now. There was no escape from whatever had besieged him. In one last desperate plea, Angus cried.
What is it you want?
A figure stepped forward and raised its hand to stop the approach of the others. A calm voice arose in response. To learn to live in the American West. Sharp fangs plunged into Angus's neck from behind. His blood pooled on the cavern floors just as his brethren of the Golden Nine had. When all hope seemed lost, the figure that had answered Angus cut his wrist and allowed his own blood to pour down onto the lips of Angus. Angus Holland was then and there born anew. No longer an outlaw toiling under the sun, Angus took this gift and became one with the night. His new peers taught him all they knew about their own history and ways, and in return, Angus taught them how to dress, talk, use firearms, and ride. The West was full of outlaws wanted dead or alive, and the law was all too happy to be rid of a few villains with inconspicuous bite marks on their necks. The rewards paid well, the company was lively, and the adventures were plentiful. Their posse became known as Angus Blood Oath Holland and the Shadow Horsemen. Rumors swirled that no outlaw, no matter how formidable, was out of reach from the law, while Angus and his men rode at night. Legends about their activities and pursuits could span multiple volumes. Some claim they were so effective that the U.S. government commissioned them to protect the president and form the first iteration of the Secret Service. Others claim the U.S. sent them into the front lines during both World Wars. Still others claim to see riders in the dark of night, wandering the deserts near Red Run Canyon to this very day, seeking something other than water to quench their thirst.
Just dying to read more? Running Chills. Available now at talesbyripgraven.com.
The Running Chills podcast is written, produced, and recorded by Rip Graven. Do not blame Michael. I was never consulted. Spirited voiceover introduction by the talented David Lambert. Heidi is voiced by the wonderful Stephanie Graven. Our tales and various voiceovers are read and performed by the author himself, Rip Graven. Igor does his own voice. Don't even try to take credit, Graven. Do not do it.
The Running Chills podcast is based on Rip Graven's book, Running Chills. For more information, please visit talesbyripgraven.com. Copyright 2023, Rip Graven, all rights reserved. Reproduction of these stories or use of our tales without express permission in any manner is prohibited.
We see you next month with another episode. Maybe.
Thank you for listening